Well, overall, I see that the situation is relatively stable. A lot of banks are cleaning their portfolios and they are undertaking number of non-performing loan transactions. I see also that the wave of this sort of quick situation which caused the trouble to number of operating businesses is over, and generally companies are now having a time to stabilize, to develop, to invest, and also to get ready for the structure which is required to be successful to manage next wave of crisis, if we would call it this way. Further, I would see that there are, however, some single credit transactions or isolated cases which will require quite substantial restructuring effort, and these cases are primarily driven by foreign exchange development, commodity price fluctuations and decline. This is particularly relevant for oil, coal and steel industry, and also companies which are focusing on some markets like Russia, where the situation is driven by political instability as well as foreign exchange fluctuation. So overall, I see also differences in individual territories. For example, Czech Republic, Slovakia, relatively Poland, relatively very stable. South and Eastern Europe, banks are experiencing still 15 to 25% non-performing loans, so they still need to go through a process to restructure, but overall macroeconomic factors are positive, and I believe this is going to last for next 18 months at least. Certainly, CE economy is an open economy. Most of the countries, there is very little regulation and a lot of connection to Europe, not so much to Asia. But a lot of CEE countries are linked and connected to German economy, and German economy is heavily impacted by situation in China, and we are seeing and we will continue to see negative development in China. So that is first factor. Second factor is oil prices. We saw significant oil price reduction. We are going to see sooner or later oil price increase, but these fluctuations are causing really troubles to individual economies and exporters. Also, another factor is foreign exchange fluctuation. We saw that for dollar strengthening, we have a big question mark where the euro will go, and this is one of the factors which is significant for export-oriented countries. So, in respect of overall development, I see a relatively stable development in individual countries. I see, and you can when you travel across CEE, a lot of new construction going on, a lot of properties, real estate projects going on, which is a sign of a relatively good health and stable situation. But back to your question, are we heading to a new crisis? Yes, we are heading. We are seeing quite aggressive banking competition. The margins which they are charging on individual projects are not good enough to ensure sufficient profitability, and also testing of a viability of the specific financing cases. So I would expect that we are going to see in 2016 some relatively large restructuring in individual countries, and I expect that systemic changes or the crisis, new way of crisis, is going to come in the second half of 2017. First of all, I see large differences between individual countries. So, for example, Czech Republic has got a 4% NPL in the banking sector. Banks are generally very profitable. But I see also countries like Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Romania, where the average NPL is between 15 to 25%, and certainly banks will need to clean up their balance sheets. So we are going to see and continue to see over the next 2 years still relatively sizable NPL transactions. I expect also that there is going to be certain consolidation in the banking sector in the CEE. I see that smaller banks may leave the market. I see that some of the banks, like Greek banks, may be leaving also South and Eastern Europe. And I see as well that there might be certain merger activities or some activities which will be driven by regulators. I see also relatively sizable or significant regulation which will be imposed on the banks, and I see that the banks will need to react, will have a cost, and will certainly be facing certain challenges from regulators. But fundamentally, I do not see any of the country that there would be really a risk for a kind of systemic failure of a specific bank or specific country. But I see a lot of work which needs to be done in the next coming years in order to achieve stable and healthy banking sector. Why I selected it is that there are a lot of lessons which are not only country specific, but which can be applied across the region. So first of all, I experienced a number of single credit transactions which didn't start as a single credit transaction, but which started that the banks had a certain control over shares and expected positive equity value. But really, when there was a market testing, immediately it was obvious that there is zero equity value. The restructuring hasn't been done properly, and there is the transaction, if it is structured in a way that banks are selling debt at a discount, then this can be a topic for the negotiation with the investors. Banks were not prepared, the company was not prepared. A lot of mistakes were made around communication with suppliers and customers, and also the investor appetite is not significant. You need to look for specific investors who are willing to negotiate and to take over relatively risky business where still restructuring needs to be completed. So for these reasons I selected the case which I believe is relevant, and I would wish, on the other hand, to see more of these transactions, because this is the way how the businesses can get a new investor, can get a new funding, the banks can deleverage, and there can be a relatively win-win situation. First of all, we have largest teams we have in Poland, Czech Republic and Romania. And I still see that these countries, and I'm not talking now about Russia and Ukraine, I can see that these countries will continue to develop positively, and I see in specific sectors or specific areas significant growth. Like in Romania, I expect there will be NPL transactions. I expect a lot of work for the banks. In Czech Republic, you know, that you can read in the newspaper, there are relatively sizable opportunities, single businesses, but large groups with 10,000 people. In Poland, I see that the insolvency practice is developing very well, and I see also a lot of work around financial restructuring. But also I see other territories like Croatia, like Slovenia and like Serbia to be still recognizing good potential, because there are going to be a number of NPL transactions. There is going to be also a number of these single credit transactions, and also I expect that there will be overall market stabilization and a lot of movements around merging, buying businesses, selling businesses, which will be connected with the restructuring cases. So I see that this overall Central and Eastern Europe is going to continue to develop quite positively, and I see also large and massive differences between individual countries. I would expect that we are going to see some large insolvencies in some selected countries, and this can be a kind of milestones in this particular area. Also, I understand that number of countries will be changing the new insolvency legislation or implementing new restructured legislation. So I would expect that we are going to see, hopefully now, some positive insolvency restructuring cases. The first part of your question, I think banks will never have clean balance sheet. NPL, certainly there is going to be a cycle in NPL. I expect, that's what I was saying, that transactions will be done over next 18-24 months, and then the banks will be relatively clean, but will be already building up a new non-performing loans coming up from financing new transactions or new acquisitions or new situations. So, but this is normal. What is important, that everything is managed well. Banks are open to recognize losses and true situation, and they are not going to be surprised when the new crisis would come about the valuation, about the level of the debt, and about other parameters which basically are causing this sort of systemic issues.